Hello world and true believers. This is Brenda, Last Aspie Girl, and I wanted to make this particular video about executive functioning, which I've been meaning to do for a long time. But it's a really big topic to cover, and I'll probably have to make some follow-up videos. And you know, whenever I make a video, I don't want to just talk about the struggles that it causes, but I always want to talk about the benefits. And I actually think that there are benefits to having executive functioning problem. I think the worse your executive functioning is, I think the more creative you could be. Because I think that in a weird sort of way, executive functioning makes you more spontaneous and impulsive, which is not necessarily a good thing. But also, like, 'cause for me, executive functioning comes most things in my life, it's always kind of an all or nothing thing. Like when it comes to emotional regulation, I'm either very logical or I'm very emotional. And when I'm emotional, I can't think logically at all, and I hate that. So I usually have to remove myself from whatever situation is because I don't like it when I can't think past my emotions. Executive functioning is kind of like that for me. I like to be very ordered and organized. And if I get into a pattern, I can follow it. But if any one thing disrupts me, I literally fall off that pattern. Like, my bedroom is a good example. My bedroom is, I consider, my fortress of solitude. I have a nice cushy chair in there, my TV in there, I have all my books in there, I have my drums in there, my paint in there, everything, you know? And I love my room. And I like to keep it clean. And if I keep it, when I keep it neat, I keep it neat for a long time. But if any one thing throws me off, it will go into total disarray and chaos. And then getting it back to where I want it to be is very difficult for me. A good example of this is I like to visit my parents, and I'll visit them every couple of months, and I usually go for several days at a time. And I don't know what it is about this, but whenever I come back from visiting my parents, unpacking and getting my room back to where it needs to be is so difficult for me. And for like a few weeks after I go to my parents, my room will be in total disarray, and that's difficult for me because my room becomes very reflective of my mind. And when I can't get my room back into order, then if my mind feels chaotic, I actually wrote a bunch of essays a few months ago on order versus chaos because of this, and I feel like that is executive functioning. It's about ordering chaos, and I feel like it's kind of like the Chinese finger trap, that the more you try to fight it and the more you try to impose order, the more chaotic, the harder it is. You know, in the Chinese finger trap, when you put your finger into it and then the harder you struggle with it, the harder it is to remove it. And it's when you stop fighting against it is when you're able to actually remove your finger. And I feel like executive functioning is like that. The harder you try to fight executive functioning and the more you try to impose order on it, sometimes the more chaotic it is. So I'm going to give the neurologist assessment and what she said about that in a little bit. But before I get into that, I want to talk about some of the coping things that I have, some of the coping skills that I have for it, which aren't always that great. But I feel like that a lot of times, just as with a lot of things, the neurosocials, the way they deal with executive functioning is they try to apply that their agenda, their motivations, and things of that nature to us. And I think that in using things like SMART goals, I don't think that's the way. And I'm going to explain why I think that, and why I actually think sometimes executive functioning can actually be beneficial. Now, what I found about myself is that when it comes to executive functioning, when I try to focus on individual tasks is when I shut down. So like in the morning, if I wake up and I think about having to get in the shower, I have a hard time getting into the shower. However, if I get myself excited about painting or dancing or writing or something, and I don't allow myself to think about getting into the shower, all of a sudden I get in the shower, no problem. And I found that it's like this for most things. Like when I have a hard time cleaning my room, if I stand in the middle of the room and I try to think of how to order it, I start to overthink it and I don't know where to start and I can't do it. However, if I stand in the middle of the room and I distract myself and think about something else, listen to music or whatever, all of a sudden I can do it, no problem. The other thing that I noticed, so one is to distract yourself. The other thing is to inspire yourself. So like the reason I'm able to paint and things like that, I think a lot of people with executive functioning are more impulsive and spontaneous than other people. And we want to be ordered, but sometimes we can't. But because of that, I think sometimes we're much more willing to start projects than other people. Like I didn't drum before. I always wanted to. Most people I don't think would start doing that at 41. And if they did, they probably would go out and get lessons from somebody else. I didn't want to do any of that. I just wanted to do it. I bought some, I started, and it seemed very intuitive to me, and I just started doing it. Same thing with painting. I mean, I did that same thing a few years ago. I got put into art therapy. I showed you guys some of my paintings, and I like they gave, you know, they said create with some oil pastels. Found out I really liked it, and it seemed kind of intuitive to me, and I became obsessive with it, and I wanted to learn everything about it. And I think most Aspies, we have obsessive natures anyways. Like when we can become passionate about something, when we have a love of learning, not as a means to an end. So if we're going to learn something, like if we decide we're going to learn drumming, it's not because we want to be in a band or make money from it or something like that. The process itself is inspiring enough to want to do it. So when I drum, I lose myself to it, you know? I start getting into it. I start listening to a song and trying to emulate it or make my own, and I can see it in my head, and I close my eyes and I can get into it. And if I think too much about it, I can't do it anymore. Painting is the same way. When I want to paint something, if I try to think about what I want to do, I lose it. Like I have to, like, I get inspired by something, I get my paints out, I start painting. The times when I actually try, when I actually try, I lose it. It's like it's there. It's like this weird thing right on my periphery that I can't focus on, or I can't do it. And it's the same thing with my videos and everything like that. Like when I overthink it and I start doing a video, like I have a hard time, and I'll stop doing it, or I won't do it for a while. But if I just allow myself to get inspired and I have ideas and I just allow, it's kind of almost like meditating. Like a lot of people talk about meditating, and I used to try to do it the way people talked about. Like they would say that they would sit on the floor and then they have to do that whole thing where like they're pushing out their thoughts, or a thought will come in and they push it away like it's a bubble, and that never worked for me. And I decided, fuck all that. I'm just gonna do this my own way, the way I do pretty much everything else. And what I did is I would just sit there and I would a lot of times I listen to binaural beats or something like that. And I just let my thoughts happen for a while, and after a while I just let them go. I just let them go, and after a while they kind of just fall to the wayside, my conscious thoughts, and all of a sudden it's like my unconscious thoughts like open up to me. And when it does, it's like this vast landscape in the back of my brain where there's these clusters of like lights and information. It's very visual and almost like there's sound, but like it's like sound is like feeling, like and I can, and if I don't allow myself, because if I start to try to focus on it, it goes away just like everything else. But if I don't and I just allow it to happen, all of a sudden I can see the clusters of information, how my mind is like trying to make connections. It's almost like you know how in a computer fragments and defragments, and always looking for those clusters of information that fit. It's like that in the back of my mind, and I can see the information trying to always looking for connections, looking for data to fit into each other, like puzzle pieces. And it's actually, and I realize now that a lot of my paintings, my more abstract paintings, are like kind of based on the ordered chaos that is those clusters of information in the back of my mind. That it's like these swirls and clusters, and always like seeking and trying to find connections and like fit together in pieces. And so it's like this weird, like where I don't have this intuitive thing always with people, the way, although I can read people, it's very different. Where I wrote to someone a comment not that long ago, naysayer, about how a lot of times the way I observe people and the way I read them is from my periphery. So if when I'm talking is usually when I observe them, because I can I don't make very good eye contact, but I definitely don't make eye contact at all while I'm talking. But it's interesting, like while I'm talking, I will sometimes observe the person from my periphery, or even when they're talking, I'll observe them from my periphery. And sometimes I also, when I do make eye contact, I make sometimes too intense eye contact. People have told me I either do one or the other. I don't make appropriate eye contact at all, or my eye contact is too intense and I look crazy. They tell me I have crazy eyes. People like to tell me I'm crazy all the time. I love that shit. Okay, so I can observe them from my periphery, and I actually realize that sometimes I don't read the things that other people read, but I can read other things. It's like I start to track and trend. Like I hear the words that they use, and I start to look for. I start to watch their behavior and see if actually the things that they say actually coincide with their behavior. Like if they claim to be the most honest person, like, are they going to start lying? Are they going to make excuses, rationalizations, everything like that? Like, and what does that say about them? And I start to look for these types of things. And also the other thing that I look for is when I tell a story about myself, how do they respond? What is their response to that? That tells me more about a person a lot of times than the things that they say. Because if you ask someone a question, they're just going to tell you what they think especially neurosocials, they're just going to tell you what they think you want to hear. So instead of asking questions, what I like to do is tell a story about myself, and then I see how they respond. Do they ask questions? Do they tell their own story? Do they show that they understand, or do they just say that they understand? Those kinds of things. And that tells me more about a person than if I ask them a question and because they have those canned responses, and I don't like that. I want to probe, and the best way to probe is not to ask questions. It's to tell them things about yourself and then see how they respond, and also watch the behavior. And then over a period, it takes me longer to read somebody, but I feel like I actually my social worker not that long ago, he always tells me that my eye contact isn't that good or whatever, and I told him that I see more from my periphery than I think a lot of people see making direct eye contact. And he told me to assess him, so I did. And his response was, I don't usually do this with people because I freak them out. He's like, are you a psychic? Because I've read all these things about him, and he's a social worker, so he's not supposed to tell me anything about himself. Yet I figured all these things out from him just by the way he responded to me telling him things about myself. And he was actually kind of amazed by this. And so I think that, because people aren't on guard when you're just talking about yourself, and they think that you're not listening. But I think that people, on the spectrum, we don't see what we expect to see. We see what's just actually there, because we're looking at all those little pieces, and we're taking all of that in, and we're not, doing those heuristic shortcuts. And so, with, and I'll get into that in a whole different video. I'm digressing. So I think that when it comes to executive functioning, that people that have that that's to the point where it's an impairment in their life, the way that I have it, I think that we want to be organized, and most of the things in our lives can be very organized. But the thing is, if one thing falls out of our pattern, everything will fall into disarray and chaos. But in that chaos, a lot of times, we find creativity, and I think that's a good thing. But the other thing is, and the reason I'm saying that I think that the way the neurotypical mindset treats it is wrong, is because I've been reading all these things on it, and they're saying that if you shouldn't allow the person to be impulsive because then they become more impulsive. I don't think that that's true. What I think that is that a lot of times, and this is how it was for me, and the more I think about this, the more I feel like this is true. When I was at work, I tried to override my executive functioning, doing all the things that I read in the books on how to be more organized and things like that. And all that caused me to do is get into states of paralysis, where I would go into work, and when I first started in my career, I was able to focus on most of my stuff was project. It was one of my first jobs. They actually realized I was really good at system analysis, and they actually made a position for me that was that they just made for me, because they realized I was good at analyze. It was in a small biotech company. We did oligonucleotide synthesis, and because they were a startup company, they had a lot of they had a lot of new processes, and I was able to go in them and do gap analyses and do all these things and figure out where the problems were, and not only realize what the discrepancies were, realize what needed to happen to fix those. And they just kind of let me go on my own and let me work, and I was able to 100% focus on this, and I loved it. But then it was no longer a challenge, and that's when I ended up getting a job at a different company, and then from there at a really big corporate company, and that's where my problems started coming in. First of all, because they don't allow you to work in that way. They want you to do what they tell you to do, not what you think needs to be done, number one. And the other thing is they give you a lot of smaller tasks, and you have to work with teams. And what would happen is, like, if I come in and I start working on a project and I get really into it, then all of a sudden someone comes to interrupt me, and then the momentum from that project doesn't get translated into the other project. And I would try to force myself to do it anyway. And I would have a really difficult time. So it wasn't just like the socializing. Like, I talk about how a lot of times, like, meetings and stuff, I had the involuntary mutism from the socializing. But the other thing that was happening to me, especially towards the end, is I was going in, and at first it would just be that I couldn't switch from one task to the next. So if someone interrupted me, I had a hard time, and I would have to actually stay sometimes later than I wanted to because I had such a hard time switching from task to task to task, and throughout the day I would have multiple tasks I had to complete, and I didn't want to get behind. I would actually, like, stay really, really late to make sure I finished everything, and I always wanted to be thorough and make sure that what I did was, comprehensive, and I followed all the steps, because, like I said, us on the spectrum, we don't like to take shortcuts. And that was very, very exhausting to me. Like, I would come home, sometimes I would, like, towards the end, I would come home and I would go to bed, and I would literally go to sleep as soon as I got home, and I would sleep all the way through the night until the next morning when I had to get up. Sometimes I would actually sleep through the whole entire weekend. I was so exhausted from socializing and from trying to make sure I was able, what I didn't understand at the time were executive functioning problems. Because it wasn't like that. Like I said, in those startup companies that I worked for, I was able to put all my focus on doing research and problem solving. So, and then when I got into corporate, it wasn't like that. And the only time that I actually had the easiest time when I worked there is when I decided, I actually went, and it was for multiple reasons I asked this. I actually went to my director and asked if I could work overnights. And it wasn't just because of this, like that I was having a hard time with these things, but actually the person I started working for, the second day I started working for her, she told me she didn't like me. Just to my face, she's like, I know what you're trying to do. That's not going to fly with me. And whatever. And she told me, she's like, I don't like you. And I was very confused because I didn't know what she was talking about. And she was really, really mean to me, like, all the time. And I remember, like, thinking, to me that was a problem to be solved. I didn't think telling on her was a good idea, because I thought that she seemed like she was the type of person who was all about retribution and revenge, and I didn't want to play that game. I don't like that. I also realized that if I tried to apply for different positions in the company, that she would probably block me, and so I didn't want to do that. So what I did is I went to my director and I said, I want to move to overnights. And he's like, nobody wants to move to overnights. Why do you want to do that? I'm like, it's a 35% differential, and there aren't as many people, and all these kind of things. I want to do it. And he was just like, he asked me, he's like, is it because of this person? And I said no, because I just don't want to make any waves. And working those 2 years overnight were like two of the best years of my life. The thing is it really, with someone with Asperger's, if you mess with your circadian rhythms, it really starts to mess with you. The first year was fine. The second year, I really started to mess with my sleep cycles. I also started having these random weird pains, and I attributed it to maybe, like, I'm not getting enough vitamin D and all this kind of stuff. And I tried taking supplements, and I got, like, one of those light lamps, and that wasn't helping. So I moved back to days, and back to office politics, and back to all these different tasks. I wasn't able to work, because at the nighttime, like, all of a sudden, like, within 8 hours, I was able to do all the work that during the day was taking me like 16 hours to do. And it was because of the people. And when I moved back to days, I was trying to tell them that, I like it's the people factor. Like, can I, like, well, they gave us a laptop, so a lot of times we were able to do certain things from home. I was like, can I work from home more? They're like, no, they wanted me to run meetings and do all these things. And I was falling apart, like literally, I was having a hard time getting in the shower in the morning. Never mind, when I got to work, I would just stare at my computer screen and I couldn't even start a task. Never mind complete it. Like my mind was literally in a state of paralysis. It was like I couldn't even absorb information. I mean, she said I had auditory processing problems, but it was like I couldn't even process anything. Like my cognitive functions were like fully impaired. It was like I was becoming so exhausted I just couldn't even function at all. And they thought it was my bipolar, like I said, but I didn't think that was it. That didn't seem like it was big enough an umbrella, because I was like, I don't feel depressed at these times. I feel stable, but I'm tired all the time, and I'm not able to do my work like I was able to do before. Like I don't think people's cognitive decline like happens that fast. Like this seems to be something else, you know. And that's when I started kind of on my journey trying to figure it out. And I remember like my psychiatrist saying like, maybe I think that from the things you're telling me it's Asperger's, but I thought I understood what that was, and I was like, no, it's definitely not that. And it wasn't until like other people kept telling me that they think that they had it until I actually had two people. One guy at a function one time told me, he's like, I think that he's like, are you a neural atypical? And I was like, I don't know what that is. And before I got a chance to like talk to him about it, he actually got kicked out of the functioning for acting inappropriately, which I look back on now, and that's actually kind of fascinating. But he was a lot younger. And then on Facebook, I had some, like, people were asking me, like, one time someone called me a female Sheldon, and I was like, I don't think that I'm anything like that. And then I had other people, just ask me if I had Asperger's, or they like, the way I responded to things was weird and not socially appropriate and all these things. And it wasn't until someone from Facebook said, you know, stop just assuming what that means. Like, go and read something from the perspective of someone with Asperger's, especially someone who's female on the spectrum, and if it resonates with you, you know, go get it checked out. And that's when that journey began. When I realized that that's probably what it was. When I started reading about females on the spectrum and everything, it totally made sense. And I went back to my psychopharmacologist actually, and I said this to her, and she's like, yes, we'll definitely get you an assessment. And that's how that happened. And it's been an interesting journey since then. But so, okay, I feel like I keep digressing. But I feel like the way neurosocials want us to kind of deal with things like executive function is they like, let's do things step by step. Let's be organized. But I think when you do it that way, you're actually going to fall off. And like if one thing happens, like I said with my bedroom, it's going to become a mess. So I've been thinking about this a lot. And I know the things that work for me is one, first of all, it's not always usually like if the end goal isn't inspiring enough, that the process itself isn't going to be interesting, then you're not going to be, I think it's going to be really difficult to overcome your executive functioning. So instead of looking at it as a step-by-step goal, I think one of the things that I do that helps me, like one of the things I have problems with is phone calls. I have problems making phone calls. Like if I want to call for a pizza, and I get excited about it, then I can overcome my executive functioning, because the goal itself is so exciting, it allows me to overcome the executive functioning. But if I have to call like Bank of America, or if I have to call for like a doctor's appointment, my executive functioning comes in the way. And what I've taught myself to do that helps me is if I look at it as a puzzle. If I look at it as a problem to be solved, all of a sudden it becomes much easier for me. So I look at it and I'm like, okay, I have to call it's a puzzle, and like how can I get from going to not the E, because I think sometimes for us like the circuitous route is actually the more direct route. You know, like if it's a puzzle and if you look at it that way. So like, you know, almost like it's like a game. Like if I'm gonna call, and like, can I make this call under a certain amount of time? Can I, like, challenging myself? Like someone wrote to me not that long ago about their daughter and how it was actually about emotional regulation, which I actually want to make a video about. But I started getting into about executive functioning. Like one of the things about executive functioning I think comes into play is how I tackle different things. Like for a really long time, I was quote unquote addicted to Coke Zero. I don't think I was addicted because of the fact that I quit drinking it in one day because of this. So I just drank it for a really long time. I like the way it tasted. I like things that are sweet, which I think goes why I probably ended up getting systemic candida. But and people would always tell me it was bad. But when we've talked about before how people with Asperger's were not influenced socially, so it doesn't matter how many people are going to tell me something's bad, I'm not going to listen. But one day someone said to me, I read a study that says that that aspartame causes brain damage. And I like my brain. I don't want brain damage because I'm consuming something. And I went and I looked up studies on aspartame, and I found out not only does it cause brain damage, but a whole slew of other problems. And I started looking into all kinds of artificial sweeteners and all the damage that it can do to your body. And because I found this out on my own, and because I looked into this evidence, that very day I quit drinking Coke Zero, and I haven't drank it since then. So I say I'm not addicted to it, because at the moment I realized it was bad for me, not because everybody else was saying it was bad for me, I stopped doing it. And so, but once again, because I did research on it, and I think this is the executive functioning thing. So if something becomes like, if something becomes exciting, you can overcome your executive functioning thing. And it's not about being lazy, and a lot of people think that. It's about finding an alternative route to what it is you're doing. Not by taking step by step, because that's going to exhaust you. You're going to have a hard time with that. I say either a couple of different things. Either like why I paint. When I paint, I can't make myself paint. I can't say tomorrow I'm going to paint for 3 hours. It's not going to happen. What I can do is think of something, look at a bunch of paintings that are going to inspire me. And the moment I feel inspired, bam, I'm going to go paint. I can't think too much about it though, or I'll overthink it and I won't do it. The other thing I can do, if I want to make a phone call, what I can do is I make it a challenge for myself. Can I do this phone call in under this amount of time? Can I do this phone call without cluttering? Can I do blah, 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 blah? I set out a bunch of challenges for myself, and once it becomes a challenge, or like a game, then I can do it. And that's worked for me in other ways in my life. Like I've noticed, like when I was younger, one time, when I was having difficulties and I had been hospitalized, and I had to move in with my parents in my early 20s, and my sister came and she called me weak, and I didn't want to be weak, and I didn't want to be weak, and I was like, and I would think about it, and it motivated me. I'm like, I don't want to be weak. I'm not weak. I'm strong. And I was like, I need to be strong. And it became a challenge to not be weak. And once it became that challenge, it became a puzzle to me, like a problem to be solved. And the moment it became a problem, like it became a puzzle and a problem to be solved, I was able to overcome it. And I realized that is not about tackling things, looking at things step by step. That's going to make it very difficult for the people with executive functioning. What I think you have to look at it is a problem to be solved. So the phone call, how do you get yourself to make that phone call? Make it a game, make it a puzzle. It's not about getting the phone call over with. It's about like how to make the phone call interesting enough for you to want to do it. Like one of the things I wanted to get more exercise. I don't like going to the gym. So one of the things I like dancing. I love dancing. I got a stripper pole and I like dancing around it. It makes me I get excited about it. If you make the event, I think for the person with Asperger's, we like learning for learning itself. We like things that are exciting. We like to be inspired. If you can have these motivating factors, you can overcome your executive functioning with ease. In fact, the task itself will become easy for you. But I think if you try to apply that neurosocial way of thinking, like you have to go to the gym because you need to get more blah 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 blah, that's going to make it difficult for you. But if like for me, when I found out I had the candida and the fibrocytic breast disease, instead of saying like I need to like do all these things, instead I'm like, I'm going to do this is the problem to be solved. Like how can I fix this myself? I'm not going to go to the doctors. They don't seem to do a very good job. I'm going to go and research this on my own and find out what I need to do. And I did that in using like this iodine protocol and like systemic enzymes and a bunch of other things. I was able to cure myself of it. And when I looked at it as a problem to be solved, I was able to do it. And like that's why I get like even making these videos. I mean, they're not easy for me, but I look at it as like I get inspired about an idea. And that becomes my focal point, not about making the videos itself, but about the idea that I have, and I start to think about that and all this stuff, and I start researching it and stuff like that, and I get so excited about the idea, about what it is, then I can make the video. But if I start thinking about having to make the video and the step by steps and looking at myself and all that kind of stuff, then it shuts me down. You know, same thing like I said with drumming. I can do it intuitively as long as I don't overthink it or try to do things step by step or do it the way everybody else does it. Because that's the thing. Most of us on the Asperger's, we don't do things the way everybody else does, and that's okay. And I think like when you accept that about yourself, then it makes doing a task and completing a task that much more easier. And I need to think about this more because I don't feel like I feel like executive functioning is a huge is like a huge concept to tackle, like a huge issue. But I also think it can be very beneficial because I think that people that have executive function are much more creative. And if we force, I think we are more impulsive, and that's something I want to get into is impulse control, because I think that I've noticed that when I try to overcome my executive functioning by applying the neurosocial parameters of like doing things step by step, I get more exhausted, and I'm more impulsive. Like when towards the end of my job, even though I was tired and stuff like that, the urge to like go out and do something bad and like whatever to maybe drink or do something was much stronger. Eat impulsively, emotionally, things like that. When I don't force myself to do things according to that way, when I do things much more organically, I don't have any impulses. Actually, I don't get impulsive to do anything, and it's not there. But then when I start to try to force myself into that, into doing things that specific way, it's like it exhausts that part. Like in that book I was telling you guys about, Social by Matthew Lieberman, he was talking about how people's self-control has to do with like not exhausting. So like if someone is on a diet and they have a test coming up and they put all their focus on the tests and they're focusing on that, they have a harder time staying on the diet because